Welcome to the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Since 2010, the Doherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska has worked toward one goal, a food and water secure world. One in which global food security is ensured without compromising the use of water to meet other essential human and environmental needs. It's a daunting vision, but one that is vitally important. This podcast amplifies the voices of those making waves in this space. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
When I was studying abroad in Namibia, I volunteered for the first women's NGO in the country. And I really recognized the incredible power of women's economic empowerment for women to make decisions for their own families.
That's the voice of Lizz Ellis, CEO of International Development Enterprises, or IDE, who recently participated in the Women Leaders in Water for Food webinar, focused on empowering women in ag and water management by advancing educational opportunities and organizing programming. Lizz is one of the women making a difference in the world of water for food, and we're going to hear more about how and why she's doing that on this edition of the Water for Food podcast. I'm your host, Cindy Zimmerman, and first I'd like to introduce you to Nicey Dawe. Nicey is the program coordinator at Doherty Water for Food Institute, where she works on implementing water conservation research in the field, collaborating with farmers. Today, Nicey's taking on a new role, stepping out of her comfort zone and getting behind the microphone to interview Lizz Ellis about her background and her passion for water and food. So, Nicey, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Hello, Liz. Thank you for joining me today for this episode of Women Leaders in Agriculture podcast series. I am very excited to have you here. Could you tell our listeners a little bit of your story and how you got involved with IDE?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start by saying thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm a big fan of the Institute and happy to be chatting with you today. So a little bit about my background. My grandfather was a farmer and left school in 8th grade, and my grandfather was a school teacher in Iowa. And as a result, my mom grew up on a farm and passed on both the importance of farming and education to my brother and me. So as a kid, I spent weekends at my grandparents' farm, walking beans, detasseling corn, baling hay. And really, these experiences taught me the value of hard work, how challenging agriculture can be, and the importance of education to broaden your opportunities beyond just farming. And so while I did love my time on the farm and with my grandparents, I actually never imagined that I would end up working in agriculture. However, I got very interested in global development when I was in college, especially after working with a women's NGO in Namibia. And that experience led to me becoming a Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco with my husband after graduate school, and focusing my professional energy around economic empowerment and economic growth, especially for women. And as I'm sure you're well aware, Nicey, globally, agriculture accounts for a substantial percent of the jobs held in the global South and provides the best opportunity for rural families to pull themselves out of poverty. So before joining IDE, I worked for a global development consulting firm supporting USAID-funded projects in agriculture across the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as Haiti. And shortly after living and working in Morocco and Nigeria for 5 years with my young family, which is a whole nother story, I came across IDE at an international rural development conference and was so impressed by IDE's focus on using business approaches, especially in agriculture, to create income and livelihood opportunities for rural families.
That is amazing, Liz. Thank you. It does sound like you have a lot of stories, and it really starts with growing up in your childhood. As a woman leader yourself, what is your vision for women in agriculture moving forward?
Ooh, great question. I think I have to start with a quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, especially timely now. It really resonates with me when she said, women belong in all the places where decisions are being made. As we look at women in agriculture, from my point of view, it's critical that we have women leaders at the table and in positions of decision-making authority as it relates to policies for agricultural advancement and technical work in the field. Globally, I believe that women's voices, opinions, and experiences must inform policy level decisions at the international, but also at the country level, which includes the national level, the regional level, and the local level, as well as within the community. As you know, women make up the backbone of both agricultural labor as well as domestic support. And that is what helps to make the agricultural work possible. So it's been proven time and time and again, if as a society we can ensure that women benefit equally as men with access to land, to inputs, to finance, to technical assistance, they can achieve yields and income equal to or better than men. And when women further have the resulting decision-making authority around the income, they tend to invest in their families, in education, in nutrition, and reinvest in their agricultural businesses. So my vision, simply put, is that we must center women equally with men in our pursuit to improve global agriculture, to ensure that we can achieve global food security and to end global poverty.
That is amazing. And I loved how you started with a very influential figure that we have recently lost, who is also one of my favorite figures, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And speaking of influential figures, my next question to you is, was there a significant moment that influenced you early in your career to focus on empowering women in agriculture?
Yes. In fact, there's two, because I'm going to break your question into women and into agriculture. So first moment that really stands out to me had to do with my focus on empowering women more broadly. And the second one really ties into agriculture. So when I was studying abroad in Namibia in college, I was fairly focused on figuring out how to combat the rising AIDS crisis in sub-Saharan Africa. However, once I got there, I started volunteering at the first women's NGO in Namibia. And I realized at that point that economic empowerment was really the key so that women have the economic means to visions that they feel are best for their families. So I kind of pivoted from focusing on AIDS to really looking at economic empowerment. Second experience was when I was working in Nigeria on a large USAID-funded project, and this one's on the agriculture front. I was reviewing our monitoring and evaluation data, and I saw that out of all of the farmers we were working with, only a fraction were women. So I began to ask some questions. Why was the participation rate so much lower? How were we trying to encourage or recruit women into the program? And through those questions, it became clear that there simply wasn't a strategy, and there was no goal to systematically increase the participation of women. So as a team, we sat together and we developed a strategy to intentionally recruit women into the program. And within a year, we saw that participation rates rose from about 10% to 30%. And every year thereafter, the number increased. And so, as I mentioned earlier, as most people who've worked in agriculture can tell you, when given the same access to technical assistance, to inputs, to capital, the women equally performed or outperformed the men in terms of yield, which substantially helped to increase the incomes of their families and the communities where we were working.
That is amazing. And I love your input on giving equal technical access to women. And especially I'm with you on increased productivity from women. You mentioned the two most significant places, Namibia and Nigeria. So having worked in so many different regions, you must have realized how each community has a different need and how it is important to address the local needs. What is the one thing, and it can be positive or negative, but what is that one thing that is common and seen in almost every community? What is it that brings us together?
I love that question. Thank you. I'm going to start with, the core reason at IDE why we believe in starting with people is because the communities that we work with understand their needs best. So a quote that our founder, Paul Polak, was very famous for saying is, talk to 100 people before you do anything. And I think this really reinforces the global understanding that at their core, communities themselves understand their challenges and their opportunities really well. So I think that what brings us together as a global society is our hope for the future of humanity, for family, community, and the desire that all of our families have across the world to see the next generation succeed.
I love that. Talk to 100 people. Wow. I'm not sure if I can talk to 100 people, but I definitely understand the sentiment behind it. Okay, so moving into speaking more about your work at IDE and you. My first question for that is, what is IDE's role in women empowerment around the world?
Yeah, I would say, globally, we see and we celebrate that women are change makers, starting in their homes, extending into their community and their country, and then also at a global level. So we are passionate about giving people and really centering around women the power to prosper on their own terms and to make the decisions that are best for themselves and their families and their communities. And we really do that by focusing our efforts on creating inclusive market ecosystems that grow and adapt to benefit everyone.
So in the several years you've been with IDE, how have you seen this sustainable business model shape over the years?
Yeah, I think, picking up on the market ecosystem piece, at our core, we really are looking to identify failures in the market and to help strengthen or create markets when they don't exist already that serve our clients. And increasingly, and especially with COVID-19, we've seen that technology is much more accessible than ever before, and digital access to information is leveling the playing field for remote smallholders. We've also seen the growth of small service companies who cater to smallholder farmers, like Hello Tractor with mechanization at a community level. And this is really why IDE, we focus our efforts on the ecosystem level, and we plug these other players into where they can play a key role and provide value for the rural smallholder ecosystem.
Yeah, so the two key takeaways that I've got from this is that it's technology and it's the cost effectiveness. These two things apparently matter the most, also in my experience that I've seen, and also in your experience. What would you say is the biggest challenge to develop this model in the first place?
I always give you a 2-for-1, so I'm going to do that again, because I think the first one is really focusing on the market side. And one of the challenges to creating sustainable, inclusive market systems is when you have market distortion. So sometimes you find in the development field that programs are established with heavy subsidies. And while subsidies are really important with a narrow and specific focus, when they're applied broadly, they can delay progress of a market system to adapt to the changes that are needed. I think the second one is you have to stick with these approaches for the long term. So I think that's one of the reasons why IDE has a long history in most of the countries where we're working, because we are walking side by side and hand in hand with businesses as they go through different stages of growth and evolution to service smallholder farmers. So you have to have that, both the short term and the long term view.
Oh, I love that. Sticking with them and being side by side. You're really there for them on every single step that they need. You don't just go in and you don't just say, here's what you should do, and now we're out of here. So, speaking of supporting people really on the ground and staying with them with the long term, I am not going to avoid this question because it is the reality. How has COVID-19 impacted this work at IDE and also with people on the ground?
Yeah, it is definitely tough, you know. As a global community, we've been hit with the health crisis, which has been followed by an economic crisis that crosses international borders, and it's disrupted business as usual and life as usual. And I think COVID-19 has laid bare cracks in our health systems and in our labor markets across the globe. So as a global development organization that is focused on food security and ending global poverty, our biggest concern from the start has been to mitigate the impacts of the economic crisis on food security in the countries where we operate. And as an organization, I would say we've had to adapt, we've had to learn quickly together and begin delivering our work in new ways to the communities that we serve. But because we are an organization with 95% of our staff who live and work in the countries that they're from, we have been able to continue to deliver impact in the field, despite all of the challenges with social distancing and new ways of working to reduce infection rates. So we've deployed alternate methods of smaller group sizes, we've leveraged digital networks, and we've collaborated with our government partners to deliver accurate information as quickly as possible to communities. And in a number of countries, this is pretty interesting, we've worked hand in hand with national governments to declare farming as an essential business so that farmers could work in the field, planting or harvesting, depending on the country that we're talking about. And that's really important because when a lot of the stay-at-home orders were issued, there was a lot of confusion and people thought everybody must stay home. But certain businesses are essential businesses, and the agricultural cycle does not wait for a stay-at-home order. There's a time to plant and there's a time to harvest. So that was incredibly important. And then I think on the operational side of things, we reached out quickly to our funding partners to share our plans and asked for their continued support as we adapted. And so I think from that perspective, I just want to say I'm so thankful for the incredible partners we've had at the institutional level, as well as the individual level to continue our work. We have been impacted economically, everyone has, but we have strong management in place, and that has enabled us to stay focused on delivering impact, which is the heart of our mission. And I also have to say, I'm so incredibly proud of our global team's ability to adapt and deliver despite all of the challenges our team and, all communities are facing right now.
So that was some interesting insight, Liz. Thank you. I was going through one of the blogs on IDE website, and this is quoting the blog. The goal is to address the real needs of people, not those anticipated from half the world away or in offices in town, and to respond with humanity and empathy that emphasizes practical results that have real impact. How do you estimate the real needs of people at IDE? I think one of the key factors you've said is your 95% staff is on the ground, but is there anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that question too. I would say having our teams based locally within the communities is a huge factor, but also going back to our founder's principle of talk to 100 people before you do anything. So all of the work that we do is built directly from conversations that we have with the people we serve. And then from those conversations, we're better able to understand the challenges that families are facing, what aspirations they hold for themselves and for their communities. And one example I might give is in our agriculture work, one of the key challenges many of the farmers we work with face is getting reliable access to improved seeds and fertilizer. So we've learned time and time again that the high cost of regional input suppliers to sell in last mile communities, it's too high. So the private sector generally does not go to the last mile or the last kilometer. And having learned this, we've been able to create approaches that enable and empower somebody from the community, who typically we like to refer to as a farm business advisor, to create a relationship with that input provider, sell those products directly in the community on commission. So the farmers in the community get access without having to pay transportation costs to go to the regional capital, and the business gets the advantage of additional sales with much lower transaction costs because they're just paying a commission. So without understanding that that's one of the key challenges, we couldn't address that need. But because we've had those conversations, we know that we're helping to fill this gap in the market and do it through a private business in the form of an individual.
Do you get help from the private business at all? Because it sounds like if the private business doesn't go to the last mile, if you are the one helping them get to the business, what is the help that you get from the private business?
Yeah, great question. I would say first off, so the agreement to make sales on commission, pay a commission to the farm business advisors, that is kind of a give from the private sector, but it's also a get from the private sector because they have higher sales than they otherwise would have had. And as a nonprofit organization, we do get grants from institutional donors like DFID or USAID, and we use that grant capital to help broker and structure those relationships so that they sustain for the long term. If we have more time later, I have a great story from Mozambique on that front following the cyclone.
Well, I would say now is a very good time to jump into stories. And you can start with the Mozambique story.
Okay, so I think this really underlines the sustainability aspect of it. I had the opportunity to travel to Mozambique in beginning of July last year, and Cyclone Idai hit Mozambique in, I believe it was about March, possibly April, right in that time frame. And as a result of that, farmers' crops were completely flooded. And I visited with one of our farm business advisors. Her name is Berta Jambo. And we went to her field and we saw, just this massive field of cabbages that had been destroyed. There was some kind of bacteria in the floodwaters and it infected all of the cabbages. So there's these really, pretty sad and kind of gross looking cabbages. And then we walked probably a quarter of a mile away to another field that she had, and there were beautiful ripe cabbages. And, I really wanted to understand how did that happen, because all of the financial resources that Berta had and the community of women she works with were wiped out. But because she had been such a good customer with the input supplier called her up on the phone and said, "Hey, I know you need seeds. You've been a great partner. I will give them to you on credit because I know you will pay them back." And part of the reason why the input supplier knew she would pay it back was because Berta also had a guaranteed market. She provided cabbages on contract to the local hospital. And so she worked with a whole community of women growing cabbages, and they were able to quickly get back into production. And if the trust and the long-term relationship hadn't have been there, we wouldn't have seen that result. And that involved zero capital and zero assistance from IDE. It was just the fruit of that long-term relationship that had been established.
It sounds like you really are going to the last mile, even in worst of the situations, to provide real access. To me, this is real impact. And if you want to go to the website ideglobal.org, listeners, you will truly get a sense of making this real impact. So Liz, I want to ask you this. How do you keep a track of all of this impact? Do you have mechanisms or plans in place before the start of the work that would help you track this eventually as you move forward or near the end of the project?
I have to say, I love that question because we love data. Because we are all about impact, and how do you know if you're making impact if you don't have data? So globally as a team, we want to make sure that all of the activities that we're doing are resulting in positive change for the clients that we're working with. And if they're not, to adapt and to change and to shift, because not everything is a winner. So you have to be a learning organization and really improve your approaches as you go. And data really helps to inform that. So we like to talk about data for decision making and data for action. And so at the highest level, just to kind of paint a quick picture for everybody, we focus on 3 key performance indicators across all of our work, regardless of which donors we are working with. The first one is scale. So we track the number of people that we're directly impacting. The second is the annual household income increase above and beyond what the family was earning before. And then the third is our cost effectiveness ratio, or social return on investment. And so a little bit about that. You asked about our data and how we measure it, how we keep it, and all of our data is captured in Salesforce, which is an awesome CRM. So our data is stored in the cloud in a single place. And it's constantly updated and available to anyone in our organization at any time. We have a great KPI dashboard, and I can drill into it. I can see by country, by province, by farmer, the impact that we're creating across our programs. And, that is such a rewarding experience as somebody working in the organization. Because if I have, we all have tough days, right? If I have a tough day, I can go in and I can see the latest impact, and you're continuing to make a difference. And so I think speaking to those top KPIs, and this is what people will see if they go onto the website and they look at the, /impact side, is that over our time as an organization, we've helped to increase the incomes of over 35 million people. And for every dollar that we're deploying, on average, the clients we work with earn at least $10 for every dollar that IDE invests.
Wow, 35 million people. That is amazing. Well, for those of us who work with data, I would say yes, data is gold mine. And I loved your 3 key factors: scale, income, and cost effectiveness ratio. So I want to ask you a little bit on that. How long, in your experience, have you seen it takes to see this impact on an average? Because it's not something you see instantly. How patient do you need to be to see this impact?
Yeah, great question. I would actually say a lot of the impact, particularly in agriculture, and we do work in both agriculture, water, sanitation, and hygiene, and also climate resilience. But in agriculture specifically, because a lot of our work focuses around introducing vegetable crops to farmers who typically are only growing staple crops, you're able to get 2 to 3 cycles of vegetable crops, as long as you can help the farmers access water for irrigation purposes outside of the rain-fed season. And because of that, you actually see that impact in the first year. And kind of one of our principles that we have in really pushing on the business approach is we want to make sure that any investment a farmer is making, they make back that money with profit in 1 year, because farmers and farming families don't have time to wait. They need to be able to recoup that impact. But what we do find is year over year over year, you see further increases beyond the first year of work. So farmers will either try new high value crops, which give them a differential on income on the same plot of land, or they start to expand their cultivation. So still growing the same crops, but more land under cultivation. So year over year, we see compounded increases.
Yeah, that is very helpful for some of us working in agriculture and really patiently wanting to see results. To close this up, Liz, what would you say to women working in agriculture, business, nonprofit, and many, many other industries to encourage them for more leadership roles?
I would say be bold. Share your goals with others. It takes a community. You really got to put yourself out there. Let other people know what you're trying to achieve, whether that's personally, professionally. I also think when you're interested in leadership roles, it's really important to volunteer at nonprofits, express an interest in getting on boards, and then really help others by sharing what you have learned. Share your struggles. Share your successes, because we are all in this together.
I love that advice for now, and I'm sure listeners listening to this right now would pick up on that as well. We have more listeners rather than women. So what would you say to men working in agriculture, business, nonprofit, and many other industries to encourage them to look around, look within, and look at all the people they are working with and all the people that are working for them to see how leadership looks in their world?
Well, I'm very glad you asked that question. And I would say the same thing to men, but I would extend an invitation to both women and men to look around the room in their meetings and help bring all voices to the table. I believe that social inclusion is incredibly important, and it goes well beyond gender divides. It's across gender, race, sexual orientation, caste, disability, age. And we need to, as leaders and as professionals and as family members and friends and community, we need to uplift and amplify marginalized voices and ensure we are creating pathways for leadership roles for everyone.
That is great. Thank you. Is there anything else that you want to let the listeners know to wrap up with?
I would say we are at an important turning point in history, and I believe we've made and we've seen evidence of incredible advances in agriculture and poverty reduction over the last 20 years. However, the impacts from COVID-19 are erasing the last 2 decades of progress. We're seeing slippage against the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's really important at this moment that we unite together to ensure inclusive recovery and growth post-COVID.
Thank you so much, Liz. I have really enjoyed speaking with you today, and I have learned a lot from you just from this interview, and I'm sure it would be the same case for our listeners today.
Absolutely, Nicey. I know that I did. Thanks so much for those great questions. It really helped us learn a lot more about Liz and the work that she's doing as CEO of IDE. And you can learn more about that organization by going to their website, ideglobal.org. Thanks for joining us this time on the Doherty Water for Food podcast. Make sure to visit our website, waterforfood.nebraska.edu, to view show notes or subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.